Today is December 25, 2016, and we are having our second Hanukkah meeting. So before we begin, let us seek our Heavenly Family for guidance. Eloheinu, our mighty ones, please guide us in our discussion this evening. Thank you for giving us this wonderful message. Thank you for revealing to us our errors and our waywardness and our lack of love and showing us a better way. Please help us to choose that better way each and every moment. Thank you so much. We ask this, Father and Mother, B'Shem Semach, Hu He, in the name of branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
So last night we read this first paragraph of chapter 5 of Book 12 of Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. And it describes certain events which took place in the 170s BC or sometime thereabouts. And it refers to several people by the name of Onias. And the first Onias that it refers to is a person who is actually Onias III. And he was high priest in Judea from 185 to 175 BC. And after, according to this record anyway, when he died, they gave the priesthood to a guy named Jesus, who is his brother. Though it later informs us that Jesus changed his name to Jason. And then it talks about a rival priest to Jason named Onias, but he was called Menelaus. So it's easier to distinguish them as Jason and Menelaus because there's multiple people named Jesus, there's multiple people named Onias, so it seems easier to refer to the person who is priest or who is high priest after Onias III as Jason, and the one who became high priest after him was Menelaus. So in Antiquities of the Jews, what we read is that Menelaus took over. So Jason, he was given the high priesthood. It would have gone to the son of Onias III, who was Onias IV, but instead it went to Jason, Onias III's brother, because Onias IV was still an infant. And he says that, we will inform the reader of all the circumstances that befell this child. Now, it's interesting because as it goes on, it talks about this guy Menelaus, who took the priesthood from Jason, and he, along with some other people referred to as the sons of Tobias, they went to Antiochus and told Antiochus how they wanted to leave the laws of their country and the Jewish way of living, and they wanted to adopt the king's laws and the Grecian way, and they wanted his permission to build a gymnasium at Jerusalem. And they also had some sort of operation whereby they essentially reversed their circumcision. So they were leaving the ways of Judaism. And what we talked about last night is how this account is apparently in disagreement with the account in 2nd Maccabees. 2nd Maccabees also talks about the high priest Jason and the high priest Menelaus, but it says that Jason is the one who brought in all these Greek ways of doing things and who brought in the gymnasium and so on and so forth. And there are some other minor disagreements between these two sources, but that was a primary one. And it's a big difference in a sense. One of the benefits of having two different accounts is it shows that they are not necessarily dependent on each other, or at least not solely dependent on each other, and that therefore they're, to some degree, two independent accounts, and therefore the things that they do agree upon have multiple independent witnesses, which is one of the signs for something being historically accurate. So the fact that Josephus says it was Menelaus who brought in these Greek ways and a gymnasium and all of that, and then 2nd Maccabees says that it was Jason, well, yeah, it's hard to say just based off of that who it was, but we now have two independent witnesses that tell us that someone, probably Jason or Menelaus, departed from the ways of Judaism, and this was a high priest, so someone very influential, and brought a gymnasium into Jerusalem, reversed circumcision, and basically adopted the Grecian ways. So it's basically clear that someone did that. And there are, of course, many other factors whereby it can be known that this happened, whether it was through Jason or Menelaus or whoever, it happened at about this time. So, these discrepant accounts can help us to verify the events upon which they agree, even though it leaves us with a little bit of a mystery as to who exactly it was. But hey, maybe that will be solved as we continue to read. So, were there any comments or questions before we get into the second paragraph?
I'm good.
None here.
Okay. Would someone like to read the second paragraph?
I will.
Awesome.
Okay. Now, Antiochus, upon the agreeable situation of the affairs of his kingdom, resolved to make an expedition against Egypt, both because he had a desire to gain it and because he contemned the son of Ptolemy, now is weak, and not yet of abilities to manage affairs of such consequence. So he came with great forces to Pelusium and circumvented Ptolemy Philometor by treachery and seized upon Egypt. He then came to the places about Memphis, and when he had taken them, he made haste to Alexandria in hopes of taking it by siege and of subduing Ptolemy who reigned there. But he was driven not only from Alexandria, but out of all of Egypt by the declaration of the Romans, who charged him to let that country alone, according as I have elsewhere formally declared. I will now give a particular account of what concerns this king, how he subdued Judea and the temple. For in my former work I mentioned those things very briefly, and have therefore now thought it necessary to go over that history again, and that with great accuracy.
Okay. So are there any comments or questions, or does someone want to explain how they understand this paragraph?
I'm looking at it again because it didn't flow very well for me.
Yeah, it's especially difficult when we're reading things that we haven't read before and that are referring to all these people that we're not all too familiar with.
Right.
The basic point that it seems like it's getting across, from what I can tell, is that Antiochus, who was king of the Greeks at the time, he decided that he wanted to go against Egypt because he wanted to gain it as part of his empire. And he was against Ptolemy, who was ruling Egypt at the time. And so basically he went against Egypt, and it says he came to the places about Memphis, which, as far as I understand, is in northeastern Egypt. And then he came against Alexandria, Egypt, which, so far as I understand, was the capital at the time, huge major city. But he wasn't able to take it. He was driven away from it, but not only just Alexandria, but out of all Egypt, by the declaration of the Romans. So basically the Romans were becoming a powerful force to the point where they could make Antiochus back out of Egypt. And so now he's just saying how, all right, I'm going to give a far more detailed account of Antiochus and how he subdued Judea and the temple and all of that. So that seems to be the basic point. Anyone else?
That's what it sounds like to me too. I wonder what made him think Ptolemy was so weak. It doesn't really say, but he condemned the son of Ptolemy as weak, as now weak, like as if something happened there.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why it would be. Maybe Ptolemy was weak. Hard to say. It doesn't seem like it was Ptolemy who drove him back anyway. It was the Romans.
Yeah, and it was the Romans that told him to stay away from that one country.
Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions on this paragraph 2, or do you guys want to go on to paragraph 3?
Let's go on.
Okay. And I just see that there's a footnote close to the beginning of it. It says, King Antiochus returning out of Egypt for fear of Romans. And when it says returning out of Egypt, there's a footnote. So I'll just read that quickly, and then whoever is going to read paragraph 3 can do so. So the footnote says this: Hereabout Josephus begins to follow the first book of the Maccabees, a most excellent and most authentic history, and accordingly it is here with great fidelity and exactness abridged by him, between whose present copies there seem to be fewer variations than in any other sacred Hebrew book of the Old Testament whatever. For this book also was originally written in Hebrew, which is very natural, because it was written so much nearer to the time of Josephus than the rest were. Okay, so it's talking about the book First Maccabees and how it is a very authentic history. And so that's according to the perspective of the translator of this work of Josephus, William Whiston. And this was... Yet scholars today still conclude that the author of First Maccabees was an exceptionally good historian. First Maccabees is viewed as possibly the most reliable historical work written by Jews in the ancient world. Apparently, it's very, very historically accurate. So that's something that's quite interesting, and here Josephus apparently follows it quite closely. So anyway, this will be interesting. So who would like to read paragraph 3?
Aren't there people playing with history? And like I heard at the Catholic churches, that they've changed history and rewrote things?
Well, it depends what we mean by changed history. People tell history different. Because remember, history isn't the past. History is just a telling about the past. And whoever tells something about the past tells it to a certain extent different from how it actually was. It may parallel it very, very closely, but there's going to be there's going to be a lot missing, and it's going to be from a certain perspective. So everyone tells something from a certain perspective, and people have different versions of history. So, in a sense, people, quote-unquote, change history, but a more exact example of changing history is for someone to have a written account of the past, which is itself a history, and to in some way alter it, whether in a copy of it or in making use of it for one's own work. So, for instance, in the writing of the Gospel of Luke, its author changed history to a certain extent by altering the Gospel of Mark when quoting it in its own work. Matthew did the same thing with the use of Mark. Other writings do the same thing. First and Second Chronicles do the same thing with the books of the Kings. So history is changed as time goes on, and it's not always done with malicious intent, although sometimes it is. Someone could change history for the better, too. In other words, if someone wrote a history which is inaccurate, someone could write another history on the same period of time and the same circumstances that could be more accurate and thus give a better account of that same history. And someone might say, oh, they changed history. But yeah, everything we have to understand that it has its limits and, examine it to find out how accurately it tells what really happened.
Maybe it was just the history between the Catholic Church and the Protestant, things that could make things look better for them.
Well, I suppose anyone telling a history, again, is telling it from their own perspective. And so typically people think that they're in the right. Obviously, Catholics, of course, thought that Protestants were wrong, and so they're telling it from the perspective that they're right and Protestants are wrong. And Protestants, of course, view it the opposite. Protestants believe that Catholics are wrong and Protestants are right. And so when Protestants tell it, they are telling it from the perspective of Catholics being wrong and Protestants being right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm reading the Maccabees from the Catholic version. Is that okay? Because I just went to online and just Google Maccabees and tried to look for that book that I only can find in Roman Catholic Bibles.
Well, Roman Catholic Bibles that have First Maccabees are just basically, it's just a translation of it using the same manuscripts as someone else would be using in translating it.
Well, and the other thing that comes to my mind is that the rest of the books in those Bibles that are the same books as in the Protestant Bible read word for word if they're the King James translation. So it doesn't matter that the Catholics use that translation of the Maccabees. You know, it's not like they wrote or changed the manuscript.
Yeah, so it's fine. Do you know the name of the translation that you're using?
United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with exactly what that is. USCBC, something like that. It might be the United Bible Society or something like that. So I'm not familiar with that particular translation, but there are multiple translations of it online. I'm sure you could find the King James version of it, which that's a translation from the Church of England. Although I don't think that the one that you have will, be bad or anything. There's also the NETS, the New English Translation of the Septuagint. That is linked to on the resources page of the bdsda.com website. And the NETS is a very good translation of the Septuagint, and the Septuagint, of course, includes First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Third Maccabees, and Fourth Maccabees. So I wanted to mention this just as another option for anyone who might be looking for a translation of First Maccabees online. The NETS, the NETS, that will be a translation of it. It's not connected with the NET Bible, the New English Translation. This is a separate project, and it's the New English Translation of the Septuagint. But again, it's right there on the resources page, bdsda.com/resources, and it's pretty close to the top of the page. Who would like to read paragraph 3?
I'll read it once I get there. 1, 2. Starts out King Antichlos. And if you can hear me all right, I'm on my telephone.
Yeah, it starts out King Antiochus returning out of Egypt.
Okay.
And Leroy, if you would speak up just a little bit more, that would be helpful. Thank you.
All right, that's what I was wondering. King Antiochus, returning out of Egypt for fear of the Romans, made an expedition against the city Jerusalem. And when he was there in the 143rd year of the kingdom of Seleucids, he took the city without fighting, those of his own party opening the gates to him. And when he had gotten possession of Jerusalem, he slew many of the opposite party. And when he had plundered it of a great deal of money, he returned to Antioch.
Okay. So, any questions or comments on this paragraph?
Who was the king that did all that?
King Antiochus was the king of the Greeks at the time, and he's the one who did all the things that are described in what we're starting to read here, and this is actually his primary identification. He's the things that he's known for are actually the things that we'll be reading here.
But tell us why he did it later on, or why did he do it?
I'm not sure if it goes into why he did this or why he did that. And the reason why probably is because first Maccabees and Josephus both address this subject primarily from a historical point of view, in which it's primarily describing what happened without getting into the motives of the individuals who did the different things, because that's something that cannot necessarily be known as to what's the real reason why this person did that and why this other person did another thing. That isn't information that is necessarily available to a writer of history.
Well, I have a comment about that.
Go ahead, Ann.
Sure.
Well, I was just going to say, the last sentence indicates that the reason, as far as whoever wrote this, said the reason that he did that was he plundered it of a great deal of money. So I'm assuming that that's why he went there, because he knew they had that money there.
Amen.
That's not necessarily the reason why he did these things. And one could ask, well, what's the reason why he took all this money and so on? So one thing that I want to say is that this isn't written in a way so as to explain this as being the reason why he did different things. Right. It's just saying that this is one of the things that he did. So he took Jerusalem without fighting against the city. He just went and was welcomed by those who were on his side. And then he went and killed people of the opposite party. And then he, took a great deal of money and went back to Antioch. So that's a list of the things that he did without explaining why he did those particular things.
Yeah, that's right. Because he might not have done it just for the money, and probably didn't actually. Sounded like that might have been a big reason. That's usually a big draw for people in wars, is money and power. But I was just guessing that, I guess. So.
Sure, and it's not to say he didn't want money and power. I mean, you'd think that that'd be part of what he wants, but it still doesn't address his core reasons or his motives. And because if you say, well, it's because he wanted money and power, why did he want money and power? And you could go deeper and deeper into that. But I think it's important to look at it from the perspective of this is describing what happened rather than why it happened, because again, that's not the purpose of Josephus, nor was it the purpose of the author of First Maccabees to describe the motives of Antiochus in doing these things. And he may have thought that he was doing something wonderful. That's the thing. He may have really believed that he was bettering the world by doing this. Most people don't go around thinking of themselves as wicked and just doing evil things because, well, they just love evil. That's kind of like a villain in a movie or whatever. Often they're portrayed as just wanting to do all these wicked things, but most often people think that they're doing something good. They think that they're doing the right thing, even though much of the time it's actually something or however much of the time it's something that's not necessarily good, and sometimes something that's very wicked. So I just wanted to mention another thing from this. I just looked this up in the New Revised Standard Version of First Maccabees, because here in Josephus it mentions that it was in the 143rd year of the kingdom of the Seleucidae. And I just looked it up in First Maccabees, and it refers to that same year, the 143rd year, and it identifies it in the New Revised Standard Version as being the year 169 BC. So it's saying time when Antiochus did this was 169 BC. I think it's just helpful to keep the dates in mind so that we can get an idea of the flow and how close we're getting to the time of Jesus, how far we are from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and how this relates to other events.
I agree with you. History just tells what happened, not necessarily why they did it. You can't really read the minds of things people are writing about.
Sure, yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Just for an overview, so I know that the Greek Empire was kind of split up amongst the four generals, and so this Antiochus is one of these four generals. Ptolemy, was it Cassander and Lysimachus, or the Seleucid dynasty? I can't remember the four of them by name, but was Antiochus. He was one of these four. And then it also is mentioning here in paragraph 2 about the Romans. Obviously, they've got some influence here, and so they come out of, according to Hadif, one of the four horns of Greece, right?
Yeah. So first, one of the things that I want to mention is that this Antiochus is Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus the Fourth, and he is coming after the circumstance with Alexander and his four generals. So he is actually not one of the four generals. And let me see, I think it might... I'm just scrolling up here within First Maccabees because I think it addresses this. Okay, so in the very beginning it says, after Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated King Darius of the Persians and the Medes, he succeeded him as king. He had previously become king of Greece. He fought many battles, conquered strongholds, and put to death the kings of the earth. He advanced to the ends of the earth and plundered many nations. When the earth became quiet before him, he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. He gathered a very strong army and ruled over countries, nations, and princes, and they became tributary to him. After this, he fell sick and perceived that he was dying. So he summoned his most honored officers, who had been brought up with him from his youth, and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. And after Alexander had reigned 12 years, he died. Then his officers began to rule, each in his own place. They all put on crowns after his death, and so did their descendants after them for many years, and they caused many evils on the earth. Okay, and then it goes right into Antiochus Epiphanes, which is generations later. He began to reign in 175 BC. I was hoping that there would be a note here saying the year that Alexander died. I might be able to find that, though.
There's a good chance he was related to one of them, probably.
Don't know. Let me just look this up with Alexander quick.
Mm-hmm.
Or if anyone's online able to just Google when did Alexander the Great die, that might be faster. We don't have our internet on right now.
Yeah, if you just look up on the Wikipedia page for Alexander the Great or whatever, it'd probably tell you the page. Our computer was just going a little slow there. Okay, Alexander the Great. There we go. Got the dates. 356 to 323 BC. So this is quite a ways, or quite a time prior to Antiochus Epiphanes.
So now, but when you say Antiochus is king of Greece, it's not in that empire sense, right? I mean, he's I've understood him to be the king of the north, and Ptolemy was the king of the south, and all that. Again, I understand.
Right.
You're saying that he was not the king of the north. He was not that northern general that took that part of the kingdom.
Right. He wasn't one of the four generals of Alexander. So Alexander had his four generals. He was not one of the four. So that got divided, and then eventually two of those kingdoms basically got overrun, and then it came down to just king of the north, king of the south. And so far as I understand, Antiochus at this time was ruling the northern Grecian kingdom. And there was another guy, Ptolemy, not the original Ptolemy of Alexander's four generals, because one of them was a guy named Ptolemy. But this is another Ptolemy, and, sadly, they just kept on naming their kids, the same names all the time. But this was another Ptolemy who was ruling in Egypt. And, so he was a king of the south, as it were.
Yeah, it can be confusing, but I know, like there was a number of Herods and a number of Caesars and a number of Ptolemies and a number of Antiochuses. Anyway, so I know that can get all confusing. But so he was the king of northern Greece, is what you're saying. This particular Antiochus Epiphanes IV.
Yes, so far as I understand, it seems to be the case, even from what we're reading, he wasn't able to take Egypt. So he was the king of the northern Grecian kingdom, which I'm not remembering exactly, the specific name for that kingdom.
Okay.
But we could probably find it out.
And so then you see where, like, Rome is influential here, or the Romans are obviously heavy-handed to some degree, driving him out of Egypt. I suppose I could find out what time the Roman kingdom was coming into prominence. But I remember learning from one of Victor Hada's studies, because the general Seventh-day Adventist take on Rome in general is that it's coming from one of the four winds and not one of the horns. And, of course, Hada talks about it coming out of Greece, which that was very, very interesting to me, because that is what, Revelation definitely seems to say, just the plain reading of it. So that was, right. So that was kind of cool.
And it's interesting how Victor Hada says that the history of Rome, the origins of Rome, is obscure in history. And, so far as I know, it is obscure. Like, I haven't been able to find exactly how Rome really originated or anything like that. And maybe there's been more information today that would show such a thing, but I'm just unfamiliar with it.
Well, at a minimum, this historical text here, definitely you can see the Romans during the time of the Greeks being involved in Grecian things, So, I mean, it kind of, backs up what Hada really is saying, I think. So,
sure.
And from a Protestant perspective, when I had gone over this before, as a Protestant, we had understood, and I don't this is an old memory, that Antiochus was really angry after he lost his attack against Egypt. He just was kicked out, and so he was kind of came against Jerusalem out of just anger and wanting to, conquer something to get his conquering kicks, I guess. I don't know. And again, I understand that this text is not saying that. I'm just saying that's what I've actually learned in a past Bible study a long time ago. And again, that was back when I was not really following principles of investigation and just believing whatever they were saying. So.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
It seems like, from my memory, that the Ptolemies became Rome. It was one of the 4 generals that kind of took over. The other ones all kind of disappeared, and he was in charge, and then he became Rome. The Romans. That's my...
Well, I'm not sure exactly how it really came about. I was pretty sure that the founder of Rome was a guy named Romulus, and so on. But there was some sort of obviously there was some sort of prehistory to that.
We'll have
something
to
learn anyway.
Investigation. Yeah.
Mhm. All right. Well, anyway, it's kind of interesting how it shows that there were people who were those of his own party here. In Josephus' account, let me ask you guys, those who were of Antiochus' own party at this point, who were they?
That's a good question.
Were there any people in Jerusalem that you guys can think of who were in favor of Antiochus and would have welcomed him with open arms, according to Josephus' account?
Yeah,
Tobias.
Right.
The ones that want to bring in a gymnasium.
That's right.
People of
Menelaus and the sons of Tobias. Sure, I think someone was speaking at the same time as me too, so please say whatever it was that you were saying.
Oh, I was just saying the people of paragraph 1.
Yeah.
I was cheating.
So that's interesting to keep in mind, and I think that it's good to have that in our attention. Like, okay, it seems to be in this account that those would have to be the people. So who were the opposing party?
Jason
and those with him, yeah. Okay, so
that was the ones that were loyal to Judaism.
According to Josephus.
Well, Josephus doesn't actually say how loyal they were or not. It doesn't really, so far as I'm able to see, comment on whether or not Jason was loyal to Judaism or those with him. It simply specifies that Menelaus and the sons of Tobias decided to leave the laws of their country and the Jewish way of living and so on and so forth. In 2nd Maccabees, they were all kind of corrupt and into the wrong sorts of things, though Jason is the one that is blamed for bringing in the gymnasium and so on and so forth. Interesting, though, that Jesus, or Yeshua, or Joshua, Yehoshua, different ways of pronouncing it, but that is ultimately a Hebrew name, whereas Jason, I think, is actually a Gentile name. So the fact that he changed his name to Jason is kind of interesting, but we'd have to look more into the names. But Yeah, Jason is certainly the opposing party, or the leader of the opposing party of Menelaus, though I don't know if they were being faithful to Judaism. And I don't know if Josephus wanted to portray that. If he thought so, he certainly didn't seem to make a point of it.
Onias, we read about in the Maccabees and the 7 brothers. Was that before or after what we're reading now?
Okay, which Onias are you talking about?
Well, the one that's in the story of the 7 brothers that he escaped.
I think you're thinking of Eleazar.
Oh, okay.
If you're thinking of a guy who was martyred.
Right. Okay, yeah, that's the one I was talking about, I guess. Forgot his name.
His name was Eleazar.
Okay.
Yeah. Gratefully.
I don't remember Ananias in Maccabees 4.
Yeah, I don't think that Onias was in 4th Maccabees either. But I'm glad that Eleazar wasn't named Onias, because that would certainly make things even more confusing.
Oh, yes.
So was that story before or after what we're reading now?
That is just a short ways after, but not by much.
So it's pretty contemporary, right?
Yeah, very, very contemporary. Like, maybe within the same year or a year after this. So this is 169. It was sometime around this, but just before the actual Maccabean revolt that those martyrdoms took place.
That's what they rose up against, was all this other stuff trying to come in, and they brought the temple back to the Jews.
Well, that's what we're about to read about in the next few chapters and paragraphs.
Yeah, the Maccabean.
We're about to get into the more contemporary story of the Hanukkah season coming up here pretty soon. Mentioned some of the preliminary events in this next paragraph.
Is that what Hanukkah is all about? It's a remembrance of the history of this?
Yeah.
It's restoration of the
history. Yeah, the dedication of the temple.
Hanukkah means dedication.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that can be our Hebrew word, actually. Even though we don't have a social meeting, let's have Hanukkah be our Hebrew word this week. So Hanukkah means dedication. And it's the dedication of last week's Hebrew word. Do you guys remember what last week's Hebrew word is?
Beit El.
Beit El. That's right. Which means?
City of God?
Very close.
House of God.
House of God.
House of God, okay.
Yeah. So this is Hanukkah, the dedication of Beit El, the house of God, or the temple. Okay, so looking at the time, what do you guys want to do? The next paragraph is rather long. If we read it, we won't be able to discuss it all this evening. So one possibility is ending the meeting tonight and then continuing on and just focusing on paragraph 4 tomorrow. Or we could read it and discuss part of it and then refresh our memory on it tomorrow and discuss the rest of it.
I'd like to go ahead myself.
Yeah, I suggest we just read it maybe, and just so we can kind of have it on the plate of our mind, until tomorrow.
I tend to lean toward reading it as well, for the fact that I really do hope that we can get into some more of the pertinent story during Hanukkah season this year.
For sure.
So I'd be happy to read paragraph 4.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
Now it came to pass after 2 years in the 145th year.
So Sorry, I just want to say, so what year is that in terms of BC?
Well, I think it was 167 during the 43rd year of the kingdom.
It was
right?
169, actually.
169, okay.
Yeah.
169, so it would be 167 now.
Yeah.
Because it's 2 years afterward.
Mm-hmm.
So now it came to pass after 2 years in the 145th year, and so that's referring to the 145th year of the reign of the kingdom of the Seleucidae. On the 25th day of that month, which is by us called Keslu, which is the day we're in well, the day we just exited. So that's the 25th day of the 9th Hebrew month, Kislev or Kislev. So this is something that happened in 167 BC on that very day. So, which is by us called Keslu, and by the Macedonians Apelles, in the 153rd Olympiad, that the king came up to Jerusalem, and, pretending peace, he got possession of the city by treachery, at which time he spared not so much as those that admitted him into it, on account of the riches that lay in the temple. But, led by his covetous inclination, for he saw there was in it a great deal of gold, and many ornaments that had been dedicated to it of very great value, and in order to plunder its wealth, he ventured to break the league he had made. So he is driven by money.
Yeah, this is an example of a historian attempting to give you the motives of a person, which historians today tend not to do because they recognize that that is inaccessible information. But ancient historians did this more because, hey, they're telling the story.
So he left the temple bare and took away the golden candlesticks and the golden altar of incense and table of showbread and the altar of burnt offering, and did not abstain from even the veils which were made of fine linen and scarlet. I'd like to interject a quick comment. You know, having recently edited the studies from last year, reading through the book of Josephus, or the various books, that table of showbread that was there was extremely ornate. And it was a gift from, I forget which king, but the king of Egypt. I forget what his name was, but remember the one that wanted the translation of the laws of the Jews into Greek? Ptolemy. Okay, great. So another Ptolemy.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had exquisite gifts made for the temple, and he wanted them to be practical, and one of them was the table of showbread, and it had grapes with gold so fine that connecting the grapes like the vines that they waved in the wind. Okay, so this was quite the booty that he got. He also emptied it of its secret treasures and left nothing at all remaining, and by this means cast the Jews into great lamentation, for he forbade them to offer those daily sacrifices which they used to offer to God according to the law. And when he had pillaged the whole city, some of the inhabitants he slew, and some he carried captive, together with their wives and children, so that the multitude of those captives that were taken alive amounted to about 10,000. He also burnt down the finest building, and when he had overthrown the city walls, he built a citadel in the lower part of the city, for the place was high and overlooked the temple, on which account he fortified it with high walls and towers and put into it a garrison of Macedonians. So there's a footnote there where he built a citadel in the lower part of the city. And what that says is, this citadel has frequent mention in the following history, both in the Maccabees and Josephus, seems to have been a castle built on a hill lower than Mount Zion, though upon its skirts, and higher than Mount Moriah. But between them both, which hill the enemies of the Jews now got possession of, and built on it this citadel, and fortified it, till a good while afterwards the Jews regained it, demolished it, and leveled the hill itself with the common ground, that their enemies might no more recover it, and might thence overlook the temple itself, and do them such mischief as they had long undergone from it. Okay. However, in that citadel dwelt the impious and wicked part of the Jewish multitude, from whom it proved that the citizens suffered many and sore calamities. And when the king had built an idol altar upon God's altar, he slew swine upon it, and so offered a sacrifice neither according to the law, nor the Jewish religious worship in that country. He also compelled them to forsake the worship which they paid their own God, and to adore those whom he took to be gods, and made them build temples and raise idol altars in every city and village, and offer swine upon them every day. He also commanded them not to circumcise their sons, and threatened to punish any that should be found to have transgressed his injunction. He also appointed overseers who should compel them to do what he commanded. And indeed, many Jews there were who complied with the king's commands, either voluntarily or out of fear of the penalty that was denounced. But the best men and those of the noblest souls did not regard him, but did pay a greater respect to the customs of their country than concern as to the punishment which he threatened to the disobedient, on which account they every day underwent great miseries and bitter torments. For they were whipped with rods, and their bodies were torn to pieces, and were crucified while they were still alive and breathed. They also strangled those women and their sons whom they had circumcised, as the king had appointed, hanging their sons about their necks as they were upon the crosses. And if there were any sacred book of the law found, it was destroyed, and those with whom they were found miserably perished also. Now that sounds like 4th Maccabees.
Yeah. So, any comments or questions on that?
It's amazing how cruel human beings can be to other human beings.
Yep.
Indeed.
Especially when it comes to worshiping God, it just makes me think of the great controversy and what really is going on here, and that just even it's just ironic that this time is going along with Christmas, probably not ironic at all actually, and how just a lot of people that I'm talking to are kind of confused about why, I'm not celebrating Christmas and what's wrong with it, and just, of course we know that it's the whole story is suspect to start with, that I don't believe it. I don't know that it's not true, but I don't have enough evidence to believe that it is true. But that it also just has totally taken all of Christianity's focus off of the way to actually worship God through the feasts and the festivals, and that is the way of salvation, not Christmas. And it just totally takes the whole world's eyes off of the truth now, the correct way to worship God, which is the only way to life. And it's just funny how many. Just how blind, and I was too, but it's just so disheartening. It's just really sad to see how many people, with the best of intentions, just are so blind, and just praise the Heavenly Family that we have been given eye salve, that we've been given the gift of knowing that we're blind. They just haven't been, they just don't know that they're blind, and we at least do. And, we get the eye salve that we can see again. So praise the Heavenly Family.
It's also amazing that, it's deception in a big way, but when it's amazing what can happen in 200 or so years, because when our country was people first started coming here, the Christians would never dreamt of keeping Christmas. And that was, you might have been throwing in the clink for keeping Christmas, back then.
fine people for doing that. For
So that's how things have changed even in our own country, because it didn't start out that way, but it is now. And people do tend to forget. They don't know our own history of our own country, actually. But, yeah, that was a big no-no, and it's kind of interesting.
It plays to our emotions, it's our selfishness, giving gifts to ourselves and our kids, and trying to make people happy by giving them things that's going to wear out or break. It's a tradition of man. It's a big lie.
Yeah, so, looking at this history in, of course, in the writings of Josephus, but he's relying heavily upon First Maccabees here. It's quite the ordeal how, when Antiochus had gone in 169, he went and was welcomed with open arms, and it was all good with the people on his side. Of course, he killed at least some of the opposing party. It says many, and he took a lot of money and so on. And then 2 years later, he comes back, and he's not even sparing those who he had made an agreement with. And, here he seems to have, at least the way it's portrayed here, he had a major problem with these people, and, plundered it. And it's interesting how it tells us that he took these secret treasures of the temple. He took temple ornaments and various items and brought about a terrible persecution against the Jews, which included torturing and killing them and even crucifying them and hanging them while they were being crucified.
And hanging their infants from them while they were being crucified.
Yeah, hanging their sons about their necks as they were upon the crosses, which is interesting because that could be interpreted in two ways. The way that I understood it when you first read it was actually hanging their sons upon their own necks. In other words, the sons are being hanged, with or on their own necks, while they, that being the sons, are being crucified. But I guess it could also... I
didn't think it that way, because they're infants. They were the ones that were circumcised. And they hung, of course, the infants are being hung by the neck, but hung means by the neck. And then I think they were around the necks of their mothers. Whatever was hanging the infant was wrapped around the women's necks while the women were being crucified. Weren't they crucified too?
Well, that's
certainly... they were strangled. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to think about it too much.
Yeah, I know. It could be read in a couple of ways, because it's talking about strangling the women. And, either way, however it happened, it's pretty awful. And there's also here the destruction of any sacred book of the law that was found. And so the whole thing is a very, very awful circumstance, something that we'll have to, study more into, of course, in coming days. I was just looking at the time here, and there's about 6 minutes left to the
end of our call.
Yeah, to the end of the call, to the hour-and-a-half point, unless, of course, our Heavenly Family decides that we should go on. But with the exception of that, I think we should try and end at that time. So
I meant the end of our phone call, we'd have to call back in.
Sure, yeah. Sure. So I just wanted to check if anyone had other comments or questions on what we just read.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. One thing that's crossed my mind to mention is the aspect, and I already did mention this as Teresa was reading, but I wanted to comment on it a little bit more, how here Josephus actually does get into looking at the motives of Antiochus, whereas he didn't in the previous paragraph. But I just wanted to expand on that a little bit, in that it's never the primary purpose of a historian to explain the motives of the individuals, because a historian does not have access to that information, which is why, as I mentioned before, modern historians who have a more developed science of historiography tend to avoid that as much as possible. It's considered bad practice to get into the motives of different people. In ancient times, historiography had not really been developed as, a distinct discipline with defined methods and so on and so forth. It started with people just telling the story. And the first histories that we know of, that being the first writings which describe a story of past events, that would be recognized as a history, they're told in a way which, they're just telling a story, and they say what's on everyone's mind. So it's like an all-seeing narrator who tells you what's in the mind of God, what's in the mind of the people on both sides of the story, and so on and so forth. And they're telling it with a clear, from a very clear perspective. It's not like a journalist who is supposed to tell the objective facts without their own prejudices or biases involved. It was just telling the story from their perspective, wanting to draw out certain things. And as time went on, histories became more and more objective in a sense. Not that they all followed that, but it became more and more of a thing to try and tell history from a more objective point of view, rather than just telling a story from one's own perspective. And so Josephus tends to often kind of give things more from the perspective, or I'll say less from a particular perspective. He tends to try and give things a little bit more objectively, at least some of the time, than what you'd find overtly in other ancient writings. So he doesn't really give you, and from what we've read so far, he doesn't try and say God's perspective on this or God's perspective on that, unless he's giving it according to a previously written source. And even in what we just read, in some of this in the first part of chapter 5, it's less telling motives, and then he's using a source, First Maccabees, and now he's telling motives a little bit more, and that's also found in First Maccabees, the telling of the motives. This is also apparent in some of the other things that Josephus had to say. There were some things in Book 12, Chapter 4, where he talks about someone being a good person, and we were reading it like, oh man, this person doesn't sound like a good person.
Right.
And I think it was a guy named Joseph. There are clearly biases there, but you see less of it than in certain earlier histories. There's a trend in that direction. But so I just wanted to point that out, as in the fact that historians today try not to do that, and the fact that historians, factually speaking, don't have access to the motives of individuals just as being a historian, it doesn't mean that historians never tried to do that. Historians did actually try to give the motives of people from early times on, and it's been a weaning away from that tendency.
what does objective mean?
To be objective is to state things not from a personal perspective, but rather from kind of a third-person perspective without giving preference to one side or another, or stating something as being, well, this person did what was right, this person did what was wrong. It's just stating the facts. So it's not getting into motives. It's not getting into why and those sorts of questions. It's
or
getting
opinions.
Yeah, or opinions.
Subjective is you're giving your own opinion, basically.
That's right. And so objective is just simply stating the facts.
Thank you, and I got a comment that it seems like people don't like somebody having a different religion than theirs. You know, they tend to want to force everybody else to worship their way. It seems to be human nature or something that, you know, the mark of the beast, even religions nowadays, different churches, they all think their religion's best and everybody should be doing it their way. And they don't mind being a little forceful when they need to be.
Yeah, it's a very sad thing.
Or disagreeing with your religion because they have their religion.
Yeah, it's a very, very sad thing. It all comes down to pride and dogmatism. And, yeah, we should absolutely have nothing to do with that sort of mindset. You know, we ought to make sure that we understand the principles of religious liberty and that we advocate religious liberty and that we put into practice within our own experience.
Amen. I went to dinner with a friend a couple nights ago, and first thing he said, we were sitting at the table, said, are you still following that young prophet? And I said, yes. And he said, well, he can't be a prophet. He's been watching Walter Weiss. And he says he named off the different tests of a prophet. He says, you got to fall down and lose all your strength with your eyes open and not breathe to be a prophet. And I said, well, John the Baptist didn't do that. He says, how do you know that? And I wasn't quick enough to say, well, how do you know that about our prophet? He asked. Anyway, he's listening to one man and he's against another one.
Well, that's been coming up a lot, and, you know, for me, and not actually even in a way that's objecting to Trent at all. I mean, a lot of people are just, you know, there's a difference between someone asking a question that's combative and someone asking a question because they really want to know and understand, and that's more the second. Praise the Heavenly Family has been more what I've been dealing with lately, which I asked Trent a million questions like that too, just from a heart of wanting to understand, not to, you know, come against the truth at all, or just come against him either. But, you know, you had said, Trent, one time that, you know, dreams and visions and even, you know, miracles a lot of times are necessary because of the weakness and the unbelief, correct me if I'm wrong, of the people, you know, and that if we were logical thinkers and had wisdom and reason, we could see the truth of something just because it's true. And sometimes we need a boost, you know, for those that are sincere. You know, and so a lot of those things that Ellen White had to do, which I know that Trent, you've done those things as well. But I mean, you know, she was, you know, the first prophet in a long time. She was a woman. You know, she was hit with a rock. I mean, there was just a lot of things that were, you know, and there's probably a ton, as we know, of unbelief just among those early Adventists. But it's much easier for us now to see the progression of truth, to see how, you know, just logically how the truth all harmonizes together. And there's really, we shouldn't have a need for, holding a Bible up at a 45-degree angle. That would be, cool, but would it really do anything? I mean, there's lying signs and wonders too. So just the fact that, it's even dangerous to base something on a sign or a wonder, because you don't, that doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't mean something's true or not. It could be lying, And anyway, I'm done.
This man
Yeah,
has never
amen.
investigated. Go ahead, Trent.
I was just saying, amen, it doesn't come down to different signs or this or that. It simply comes down to the truth, whatever it is. And I just wanted to say that it's interesting how, it's the way that you express things is correct, Mary. It's just interesting, another aspect of it, how, it's you mentioned people being sincere, and how those who were sincere and who really couldn't understand, well, a vision or a dream would be given for their benefit at times and so on. But then it's interesting how Ellen White talks about the reason why in her later years she received less visions and dreams.
Oh, it was early on. It was like...
Oh, that's true.
It was like 55.
Yeah.
55.
Okay, yeah, you're right. This was actually still quite early on.
Sorry, 1855.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is still early on, but after however many years where she was receiving a lot of visions and so on and so forth, and then she started to have less, and she said the reason why is because unbelief in the visions. People weren't actually benefiting from them because they just had little faith. And so, it can work both ways, where people are faithless and therefore they don't receive visions because they're insincere in their faithlessness. However, someone may be sincere and have faith to a point in that they not necessarily faith in the salvation that Heavenly Family offers, but faith in the truth of the Scriptures or whatever it may be, but be discouraged and need encouragement and something like that, and sincerely seeking truth, and then our Heavenly Family may give a vision for their benefit. But what happened a lot in the early Advent movement is that people were studying to find the truth, and they really, really, really tried to understand, and they made a serious research out of it. And when they couldn't get any further, then Ellen White would be given a vision. And what it was doing was to show the need of pressing forward and studying and coming to gain an understanding of something because it's true, and understanding of something based on the evidence, but then also showing how we're helpless without God. That we need ultimately to have the help of our Heavenly Family in coming to understand the truth, because just on our own, with our own feeble efforts, we can only go so far. So it requires a cooperation of the divine and the human. And that's what will bring about an understanding of truth.
Thank you. Do you have, I vaguely remember, Teresa, you mentioning that before, where Sister White's visions and the signs and that kind of cut off early in her prophetic career. Do you know where I could look for that, or do you have a quote? You know how I can search for it if I have the 3 or 4 words?
Let me just see if I can pull it up real quick. It's in the Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1.
Okay.
I'll just see if I can find the exact one.
Okay. And Trent, I remember that principle you had taught us about getting a vision to clarify after they had been ready to receive the right answer because they were prepared because they had studied, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a reference for that, too, that would be cool. I mean, I've heard it, but...
Right. Yeah, we'll see if we can pull that up, too.
A lot of times when people ask this question about, the spirit of prophecy, they want to believe it. They really want a prophet. They want a spokesperson for God. They want to be guided. They want to be directed. So a lot of times they're not opposed to it. They want to be settled in their own heart. And a lot of times the wheels are turning in their heads. How am I going to tell my friends? So like I said, the question really, honestly, Trent, isn't coming from a heart of unbelief, just really a heart of wanting to believe and just wanting to understand. So to have some Ellen White's quotes on that would be a huge blessing to them and to others.
Okay, Mary, I have the reference.
Okay, I'm ready.
In Volume 1 of the Testimonies for the Church, page 119. It's in a testimony called Parental Responsibility, and it was written in 1855, and she says, I saw that the reason why visions have not been more frequent of late is they have not been appreciated by the church. The church have nearly lost their spirituality and faith, and the reproofs and warnings have had but little effect upon them. Many of those who have professed faith in them have not heeded them. And I'll just finish it out because it does refer to this again. Some have taken an injudicious course when they have talked their faith to unbelievers, and the proof has been asked for. They have read a vision instead of going to the Bible for proof. I saw that this course was inconsistent and prejudiced unbelievers against the truth. The visions can have no weight with those who have never seen them and know nothing of their spirit. They should not be referred to in such cases.
Wow. Which again,
that's excellent.
It's based on, Ellen White is saying, it's the truth that these people need, to be pointing to the miracles is not, that says it perfectly. Thank you so much.
Amen. So even in regard to the present message, if someone objects to, me not falling down on the ground or anything like that, you could read this and say, look, even if that was the case, I wouldn't be able to use that to you as an evidence that he's a true prophet or anything like that.
There's a testimony that I think is absolutely vital for everybody to become extremely familiar with, and it's one that I've been doing a series of videos on for the Timeless Testimonies YouTube channel. It's in Volume 5, Testimonies for the Church. It begins on page 654. It's called The Nature and Influence of the Testimonies. And one section is called, Wrong Use of the Testimonies. And it goes into this principle, among other principles related to the wrong use of the testimonies. But one of the points she brings out is that, you can't use the testimonies and visions and different things to try to prove the truth of the message to people who don't already believe the message. You have to use the truth itself. And you can't be referring to, pretty sure it's in this section, you can't be referring to Ellen White's visions and these different things as evidence. And that's just one important section. The next subheading right after that is to be judged by their fruits. And so she's bringing out that the testimonies for the church can stand the test of their fruits. Matthew 7, Jesus is saying how you can identify a false prophet. And he's saying you have to test the message, that it's by their fruits you will know if they're a true prophet or not. A good tree cannot bring forth bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bring forth good fruit. So there's videos on almost every one of these now. I've got one more that I'm about to finish up and upload tonight. And then there's one section left. It's a little bit lengthy, but, read this testimony. Become so familiar with it, because here's how it begins, all right? And I read this at the beginning of almost every video, because it is that important. And by every video, I mean every video going through this testimony. It's a very, very long testimony. But I always remind us in the videos why we're going through it. And here's what Ellen White says. And this was written in 1889. Okay, so this was right after the righteousness by faith message came and was rejected in 1888. She says, as the end draws near and the work of giving the last warning to the world extends, it becomes more important for those who accept present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies which God in his providence has linked with the work of the third angel's message from its very rise. In the following pages are given extracts from what I have written during the last 40 years relating to my own early experience in this special work, and also presenting what God has shown me concerning the nature and importance of the testimonies, the manner in which they are given, and how they should be regarded. And then she gets right into it. I think this is probably, for present truth believers, the most important place to start when considering the testimonies for the church.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
In regard to the other section, I think it's also in Testimonies 1 where Ellen White talks about the common experience among believers where they would study out an issue, she doesn't really understand it, and then she would be given a vision when they could go no further. We'll see if we can find that too.
It might even be in the
biographical sketch.
Yeah, biographical sketch, yeah.
Yeah. It might also, I'm trying to remember if it's in early writings too. But we'll look for that and then see if we can send that to you as well.
Great, and I can probably look up the phrase, they could go no further, or maybe...
Yeah, that might be it. I'm not sure if that is there or not.
I'm pretty sure it's in the biographical sketch, and one of the reasons why is because a few weeks ago we watched Tell the World, and basically that movie just uses the biographical sketch as the script for the movie.
Oh, really?
Pretty much.
Well, not literally.
Well, not word for word, but I mean it follows that history. And there's little details that I only remember seeing in the biographical sketch that they bring out in the movie. Like, for instance, William Miller leaving the podium while he's speaking to go down and help a lady find a seat in a fully crowded church building while he's, giving a sermon. They're just trying to show that he's a very nice man, and that's something that Ellen White wrote about. That's what she pointed out. But that's an aspect brought out in the movie. And one of the other things in the movie is mentioned where Ellen White's talking to James, and she's like, I feel like my mind is a complete blank, like I'm closed off. I can't see these truths that you guys see until I have a vision. And James says to her in the movie, well, that works out because nobody can say that we're getting all of our information from you. Maybe the Lord has it this way for a reason. He has your mind closed off to allow us to study, and then if we just can't figure it out, then he gives you a vision. So I'm pretty sure it's there.
It's incredible. Some of my friends have been watching that and seeing the parallels between the early Adventist history and our branch history, or the history we're making, and how similar they are, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is awesome that they're seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we've ended up, let's see, it is, 9:52 here in Eastern Time. So we should probably bring the meeting to a close. And, then maybe if we come across that statement, we'll either send it to you directly, Mary, or maybe we'll post it on Facebook somewhere where you'll be able to see it, or both, or whatever it ends up being.
Thank you, you too.
Yeah. Okay, so who would like to thank our Heavenly Family?
I will. Heavenly Family, I just thank you so much for tonight. I thank you for all the things that you have taught us, all the things you've opened our mind to, and I thank you. I know it's hard for me anyway to learn about all these people I've never heard of before, and all these names and all these events that the Christian world is not that knowledgeable about. So thank you for bringing this information to us, and help us to study it and to be diligent studiers so we can get the most out of these meetings. And bless each one on the call, bless our families, bless all the branch candidates, and bless the future branch candidates as well. Go before us and prepare their hearts for this message in the name of the branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.